And as you note, the meeting is being recorded, and we're going to have both of the meetings, today's and tomorrow's. We're going to post them on the Parks website after the meetings are completed, and we'll edit them for clarity. So anyone who was not able to join tonight will be able to go on the website and listen to both of the meetings. It'll be the same content, we'll just have different participants from the public. So anyhow, welcome and thanks for joining us this evening. I'm going to move on to some housekeeping. You've all been muted when you entered the meeting, and your microphone is red when it's muted. You can click on the left side of the menu to get closed captions if you want that. Throughout the meeting, anytime you can type any comments or questions into the chat box, and then we will respond to them during the discussion period at the end of the presentation. If you'd like to speak, as opposed to writing your thoughts into the chat box, you can raise your hand. There's a little icon there that says raise hand, and we'll unmute you so you can speak during the discussion. And then if any time you need to leave, you can click on the red X and the red circle with the X in it, and that'll take you out of the meeting. So with no further ado, I'll move on to present the people who are from Parks who are on the online tonight. We have Susan Boudreau, our Clermont site manager. Linda Cooper is our Taconic regional director. Mark Hohengasser is the environmental analyst who's working on this plan with us. And then there's myself, I'm a park planner based up in Albany. Panelists are people who are going to be helping respond to questions as they come up. Diana Carter is the Assistant Director for Planning and Analysis, also in Albany. Bill Kratinger is the Project Director for State Park Survey, Historic Preservation, and he's based up at People's Island. Tim Dodge is the Clermont Park Manager. So those areas of expertise are all available to answer questions and respond to comments tonight. Move on to the next slide. The agenda, just quickly, we're going to provide, basically the purpose of the meeting is to just go through the draft master plan. There already have been several public outreach events, and we've incorporated those, the topics that came up and taken those into consideration in drafting the plan. So we have a complete plan. It's up on the website. It's in the website address is there in yellow at the bottom of the photograph there. And we also have hard copies of the draft plan at the Clermont Visitor Center, at Parks Taconic Regional Office in Staatsburg, and at the Germantown and Tivoli Public Library reference desks. So if you'd rather look at a hard copy or you don't have a, you don't like to look at things read things on the computer, then you can go look at the hard copies in those places. So what we're going to do is we're going to cover some background of the plan and why we are developing one for Clermont. And we're going to look at some of the actions, not all of them. So, we'll just look at some of the key actions that might be of interest. And then you can look at the complete plan, as I said, to see all of the proposed actions. We're going to talk about the environmental review process that accompanies the plan and look at next steps for developing the plan. And then we'll open up the meeting for your comments and questions. So I'm going to pass it over to Linda for a moment. She's got a few opening comments that she'd like to make. Go for it, Linda.
Thank you, Tana. So welcome, and thank you so much for joining us this evening to discuss planning the future of Clermont. As Tana said, I'm Linda Cooper, the Regional Director for the Taconic region, and we have 11 regions statewide. The Taconic region is comprised of 4 counties: Westchester, Putnam, Dutchess, and Columbia counties on the eastern side of the river. And as Tana mentioned, we've held several meetings, and some of you in this meeting were with us last May when we asked you for your thoughts and your insight. When we had a meeting similar to this, but we went into breakout rooms, some of you may remember that, and we talked about some of the different aspects of what would be in the plan, whether it was programming or landscape or facility or accessibility or any of those many different issues. And Clermont became a state historic site in 1962. It's an amazing bit of land that's in Columbia with a little bit of land in Dutchess. It was designated as a National Historic Landmark in 1973. It's an anchor in what was designated in 1990 as the Hudson River National Landmark District, which we often call just the Great Estates area. And anybody who has stood on the lawn, the Southwest Mansion lawn, actually anywhere along the lawn, and looked out at the Catskills and the Saugerties Lighthouse, and the magnificence of the Hudson River that we can see in this slide, we know that beyond the people that lived at Clermont, the place is extraordinarily special. So part of what we are doing is looking at the place, we're looking at the people, we're looking at the history, the legacy, and the natural resources, and so many different aspects of what it is that makes Clermont State Historic Site. So today, Clermont looks much as it did in the early 20th century when it was the home of the last two generations of the Livingston family who lived there. And our role today, as I said, is to look at the property and determine how we should approach its preservation, its interpretation, its landscape, its visitor management. And this plan is really aimed at sort of the next 10 to 20 years. Through ongoing research and new interpretation, we seek to create an inclusive environment more reflective of our multicultural past and welcoming to all. Those that are looking for stories who might come to the site, those who are looking for a place of respite and rejuvenation, or those who are seeking to understand their place in history should be able to find it at Clermont. So during this evening, you'll learn what is embedded in the master plan, which, as Tana said, is on the website, and how the input and information that was gathered over the last year has been put together to create a forward-looking document. We'll be asking for your review and your thoughts on this plan before it's adopted. So that the purpose of tonight is just to familiarize you with a little bit with what's in the plan, sort of from that big macro view, and then have you go back and take a look at it and understand the process of next steps. So thank you for joining us this evening. We really appreciate your time and interest and expertise, because many of you hold a great deal of expertise, and we're just so pleased that you could join us. And I'd like to introduce Susan Boudreau, who is the site director, site manager for Clermont, and she's going to pick up from here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us this evening. We're very excited to have you with us. This has been an incredibly exciting process over the past 2 years. And I just welcome you for going along with us and sharing all of your input. And we look forward to an amazing document at the end of this process. I'm going to talk a little bit about the site background. Clermont has a complex and dynamic history. Sitting on the eastern shore of the Hudson River, it exists as a unique cross-section of several North American narratives, representing countless years of indigenous history, the Northeastern gentry, the enslaved peoples of the North, and so many more communities. Because of this complicated and rich context, the site offers its visitors the chance to examine American history with a nuanced approach and a comprehensive range of lived lives. When the site was acquired in 1962, recreation was the foremost goal of the first master plan. When Parks as an agency grew to accompany historic preservation in 1981, the focus at Clermont shifted accordingly, and the plan was updated in 1982. The last update of our master plan before this current version that we are working on was 1993. As you can imagine, in the 30 years since, the Hudson Valley, its residents, and the world around all of us has changed dramatically. While the Livingstons had traditionally been the historic focus of Clermont, 4 years ago, Clermont joined the agency's Our Whole History initiative, which seeks to bring a more balanced narrative to public awareness, enriching both our state's history and the stories we share throughout our parks and sites. This has been done through ongoing research and new and ongoing interpretation. As the Hudson Valley evolves, so should its recreation and the way we continue to interpret its history. I'll now turn the next portion of our program back to Tana Bigelow, our esteemed planner. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Susan and Linda. So I wanted to talk a little bit first about why Clermont was selected for to create a master plan. As Susan noted, the last master plan update was completed over 30 years ago, or about 30 years ago. And additionally, attendance at the site has been rising pretty dramatically. In 2018 to 19, almost 87,000 people visited. In the current fiscal year, 187, more than 187 visited. So in addition to just the volume of visitors, there's changing demographic patterns in both the overall state and in the Hudson River region, which have been especially marked during the COVID-19 pandemic. And this influences the types of activities and the programs and the open space that people are looking for. So a master plan evaluates how the community and the larger audience are using both the historic destinations and their recreation choices, and it anticipates how the site can meet these needs. Also in 2024, New York State Parks will be 100 years old. So this is an important milestone, but it also means that our infrastructure is aging. And we see that at the historic site and all of our facilities. Also, there's climate change impacts which are increasing. We have the more frequent severe storms, heat waves, diminished snowfall. All of these things impact how people use the site, and strategies are needed to address these pressures. So these are some of the key points that we looked at when determining the need for a master plan at this site. Next slide, please. So as Susan said, the master plan looks to the future to ensure that a park or site will be resilient and relevant over the next 10 to 20 years. An important part of the planning process is that the group will envision how can the site best evolve to accommodate all these different factors and best be available for future visitors. So this is a vision that we developed and that we use sort of as a backdrop when we're developing ideas for changes at the site. And the vision statement is that Clermont State Historic Site will be a cultural, recreational, and natural destination that'll be accessible to all and relevant to all. The site will be a leader in visitor engagement and dialogue. It will reflect our diverse regional heritage and continue to develop our present and future role in the Hudson Valley, using the site's historic context and restorative landscape. Next slide, please. So what's going to change at Clermont as a result of the master plan? We're going to look at some of the actions. The actions are designed to foster a balance between the need to preserve the site's historic character while caring for the functional infrastructure and protecting the natural environment. So there are several plates that you have to keep in the air at the same time. The plan ensures that the site will not be overdeveloped, developed inappropriately, and that changes to the infrastructure and the function are designed to improve accessibility, create wider relevance, and engage visitors with more of the site's resources, including underutilized or at-risk elements. So let's look at some of the things that are going to change and dig into some of the actions. The woodlands, meadows, and wetlands that create Clermont's sort of bucolic landscape are going to become healthier as a result of implementing the plan. As part of the master plan development, biologists, stewardship staff, and other natural resources specialists came to Clermont and participated in a one-day event called a Bio Blitz. And the goal was to identify as many plant and animal species at the site as possible within an 8-hour period. This is the first time this kind of inventory has been done at Clermont, and it resulted in a wealth of new data that helped inform the development of our natural resource actions and will improve the natural environment. The lists of species and a lot of the data that was collected are included in the plan's appendices. Next slide, please. So as stewards of many of New York's historic and cultural resources, New York State Parks is tasked with protecting and preserving resources that often require really specialized care. At Clermont, a major project to refurbish the mansion's exterior has been recently completed, which is a significant move forward, but much more work is needed, including the mansion's interior and other elements across the site. So the master plan is proposing that we develop a historic structures report and a furnishing plan for the site and mansion, which will thoroughly document the mansion's material elements. It'll evaluate their condition and make recommendations to address existing issues. This is an important step since Clermont is really fortunate to have a large collection of original items, which include furniture, artwork, decorative objects, historic materials, wallpapers, textiles, kitchens, and even plumbing that were original to the Livingston family's residence. And these also need to be appropriately protected. A furnishing plan allows for the authentic recreation of spaces as they were used by the family and the way that they were originally decorated and furnished. I believe at around 1931 is the target date that is used for the recreation. This also helps to inform interpretation. And historic elements in the landscape include remnant homesteads of tenant farmers and other agricultural structures, and these will also be surveyed and assessed. Next slide, please. So Clermont has much history that goes beyond the mansion. If you've been to the site, you've seen the Errol House ruins. It has 2 historic cottages and the Red Barn, which was pictured here. And these all have potential for becoming more functional and active site elements. The Errol House is really in need of stabilization and a new approach to interpretation. Sylvan Cottage is deteriorating. That's pictured at the center there. Its location near the teaching garden is ideal for supporting the Harvesting History program, which takes place right there and is one of Clermont's most successful school programs. The Red Barn is a significant historic structure at the site and in moderately good condition. So with minimal repairs, the barn could become a multifunctional amenity for seasonal exhibits and outdoor events. Next slide, please. So in addition to its historic value, Clermont functions as a public park for recreation. Outdoor recreation that we see here is generally passive. People come to take a walk, watch a sunset, bird watch, or enjoy nature on the trails. One of the master plan goals is to help visitors discover elements of interest beyond the historic core of the south part of the site. And some of the proposed recreational activities include creating clear access points for the trails, adding site maps, informational signage, and trail markings so that the trail system is more legible and cohesive. When you come to the main parking lot, there's no indication really of where you access the trails or the entire system. So that's something that was noted right off the bat. Equestrian use is a historic activity at the site, and there's potential to engage interest groups if the site were to offer special equestrian events. And a new picnic area is proposed at the ice pond in a scenic spot with views across the rolling meadows and the woods and to the mansion beyond. So these would be new or enhanced amenities for recreation at the site. The National Park Service reports a decline in visitation to parks among younger people over the past decade, with the average age of visitors to historic sites in particular around 50 years old. So this trend also affects the overall diversity of visitors. At Clermont, special events and exhibits have already led to an increase in young adults visiting. Educational development staff will continue in this same vein to develop content and approaches that help shift the trend and bring in a more youthful audience. Proposed actions are to actively develop content that reflects our whole history initiative and looks to increase relevancy and provide multiple perspectives that better reflect the evolving demographics and contemporary interests. As new programs, interpretation, and events are developed, they will be varied also to appeal to different ages, backgrounds, and interests. So a big issue that came up as the planners were working on this project, the Clermont was not constructed with accessibility in mind. There are steps, steep walkways, rough surfaces, and other impediments to accessibility that are found throughout the site. Providing universal access to the major site elements, especially the mansion, is a significant issue. And it was determined that it was outside the scope of the master plan to resolve. So a formal technical assessment of the overall site is proposed. The issues that were identified include the mansion's entrance, which has to be reached through these steep steps and a landing. And while there is a lift available, it's on the mansion's north side. It's outdated and does not provide a welcoming or equitable experience for visitors. Restrooms and staff offices inside the mansion are not accessible. And we also looked at installing a ramp, but determined that it would result in likely and substantial visual impacts to the mansion and to the historic landscape. So undertaking an accessibility study using a professional will consider all viable options to improve access at the site. So in the main visitor lot area, the public restroom adjacent to the lot is a visual block for views across the Hudson, and it also needs to be assessed for accessibility and to be updated. A plan has been developed to relocate the restroom to the opposite side of the parking area as part of the parking lot redevelopment. And then at that time, a more accessible and updated restaurant will be installed. The footprint of the former restaurant's location would be the proposed location of a universally accessible viewing platform that would connect with a proposed accessible multi-use trail. The site's visitor center is proposed for improved signage and an accessible covered landing at the entrance. Accessible interpretive trail will be developed near the mansion with an updated narrative that reflects Clermont's whole history. Next slide. So circulation, we also looked at throughout the site, and a number of issues were identified for both cars and pedestrians. We looked at walkways, roads, trails, carriage routes, and how they were used. And some of you, first of all, may have experienced how easy it is to miss the main entrance to Clermont. So one of the proposed actions is to relocate the site's main access point. This will increase the site's legibility in the area and improve safety for drivers, pedestrians, and cyclists on Woods Road, which is now part of the Empire State Trail. The main parking area would be redeveloped, as we mentioned. It'll have new pavement, green infrastructure, clear markings, handicap parking, pedestrian routes, and drive aisles. So those are circulation improvements. Slide. So the region is subject to power outages. There's severe weather. Can leave the site without electricity for days. Apart from the inconvenience to operations of the facility, this is a concern for historic items and materials, which can be damaged by extended periods without climate control. With climate change is also anticipated to increase impacts on both the built infrastructure and natural elements. Clermont is planning to take a more proactive steps to protect its historic elements and natural areas with new approaches to improving the site's natural resources. As you may know, Parks is working to meet the state's goals to generate 70% of its electricity from renewables by 2030. To that end, EVs will replace gas power vehicles and equipment, and solar is being installed where practicable. Staff from our Energy Bureau surveyed Clermont and determined that the maintenance area is a viable location for installing solar panels, and you can see their conceptual plan there is the maintenance center. and the red bars are basically where the panels would go. So there will be no visual impacts to historic elements using the maintenance center as a site. And as shown, this will offset 100% of the site's energy costs. So in addition to assessing the site and describing proposed future actions, the master plan includes an environmental review process designed to identify environmental impacts that may occur from undertaking the actions. So I am going to hand it over to Mark to talk about the environmental review aspect of the plan.
Hello. When a master plan is created, it has a companion document that we call the Environmental Impact Statement, or EIS. In this case, it's in draft form, so we call it a draft EIS. The EIS provides analysis on all the proposed alternatives that we've considered. So over the past year, we've talked about a whole host of different alternatives on all the different topics that you've heard about today. Through that analysis, we have determined what we call preferred alternatives, and those are essentially the master plan document that you've been hearing about. Within the EIS, there's 2 chapters that really focus on environmental review. There'll be chapter 2, which is the development of alternatives. If you're interested in seeing all the other alternatives that we discussed and the reasons why we either chose them or didn't choose them, chapter 2 is a really good resource for that. Chapter 4 is the environmental impacts and mitigation section. Basically, that takes all of the preferred alternatives that we have discussed and analyzes them for their potential environmental impacts and suggests ways to avoid or minimize them. Once the master plan is complete and signed off, we begin implementation. We have this review called the Master Plan Consistency Review, and that is a way for us to make sure that moving forward through the years, all of the projects that are proposed are consistent with the vision and goals of what we were trying to accomplish today. So in the event that they are not, that's okay. It just means that there's additional review that is needed to make sure that they are not impacting all the different resources, whether it's cultural, natural, scenic, and whatnot. You'll also notice that some of the alternatives that you've heard about today are more conceptual in nature, proposals, things that we want to do in the future. That is okay. That just means that those will require additional environmental review when we have a planning and design phases associated with them. So if you're really looking for a kind of behind the scenes look, I would look at chapter 2 and chapter 4, and that'll give you a look at what we were thinking when we created the master plan. So I guess with that said, I will turn it back over to Tana for the next phase of this presentation.
All right. Thank you, Mark. So master plan timeline. These dates may be adjusted, things come up, and sometimes review process, comment periods take a little longer, but these will give you a general idea of the next steps. The full draft master plan was published on the website on April 26th, and there's going to be the comment period will close on let's see, the comment period starts today, and will close on June 8th. So I encourage you, as Mark said, to look at the full document. The plan will continue to evolve based on input from this group, internal reviews, additional public comments that are received during the comment period. There'll be additional opportunities to review the plan before it's finalized. However, I would say that this current comment period, which runs from today until, today until June 8th, is your best opportunity to provide feedback. Eventually, once the comments are all received, they will be added to another chapter in the environmental impact statement that will include responses from parks to the individual comments. So all substantive comments will be compiled, and in some cases, the plan will be revised based on those comments. So now I think that we're done going over the plan content, and I'd like to move forward to the next slide, please, and we're going to open it up for discussion. As I said, you can either type your comments. I see we have a couple of comments, or you can raise your hand if you'd like to speak. And we also have comments that were received during the registration process. So, so we'll look at those as well. But with that, I'd like to open it up if anybody would like to jump in.
Oh, no. Why don't you have Madeline read the questions in the chat, and you can we can distribute them to answer.
I see that one comment is, if the median age of visitors is 50 years old, how many children visit the site? So I can answer at least the first part of that. That statistic was from the National Park Service, so it wasn't specific to Clermont. I don't know if Susan or any of the panelists have any idea of the statistics for children visiting the site.
I'd love to answer that, because we believe that between 30 and 40% of our visitors are children, that we have a very high visitation of families, Matt, and thank you for asking that question. And anecdotally, just from the number of events that we hold, after school programs and everything, we have accounted for probably at least 20,000 children that we know of for sure in our different activities with Harvesting History, our after school programs, and our public events, large and small. So we think that that's an outdated number, and particularly for Clermont and what we're doing now and our increased visitation, I would say, Matt, it's predominantly families that have come up here and, as have relocated, from the city or wherever during the pandemic. I think many of them are families, and we're getting feedback from families regarding that. So I think that, personally, I think that's an outdated number, and we're not seeing that here, which I'm very excited about. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Susan. I also see a comment that says, what is the role of the Friends group in this process? And I'm not sure this process, what that refers to.
The master plan process is what I would think. Okay.
Oh.
And I'll take that one.
Okay.
The Friends group is, we have met with the Friends group early on to solicit information and share the process for the master plan. And we encourage any member of the Friends group to review the plan and to give us comments and input. It's, we don't necessarily distinguish between the Friends groups and members of the public. It's just, we encourage in particular a group that is as closely associated with the site as a Friends group might be, to ensure that they understand and agree with, ideally, or at least have input into the plan. I don't think there should be any surprises from what the Friends group has seen at earlier times.
Okay, I see that there's a comment about river access, and we also received that in the from the registration form. So one of the comments was, gaining shoreline access across the tracks with modern at-grade crossing was something that they would like to add to the discussion. Would anyone take that question?
Well, I'll take a stab. There is reference to river access in the plan. However, I would say at this time we're not encouraging at-grade crossings of any railroad tracks. It's just still deemed to be pretty dangerous from a state parks vernacular. I know that Scenic Hudson has looked at at-grade crossings and thinks that there's some mitigation measures that can be done with timing of what do you want to call them? Fences, gates that come down, and that have been used in some of the areas in the Midwest. But at the moment, it's not doesn't have a heightened sense of safety in our world. And our work with the railroads, which we do a lot of work with the railroads, does not give us any sense that that would be a reality in that world.
All right, thanks, Linda. I see a question. Do we know approximately how the number of visitors will increase? And is there a plan in place to avoid overcrowding and erosion of the trails? Well, in terms of the trails, I can respond to that. There are actions proposed in the plan to improve the trails, to repair wet areas, to some of the trails that go through sensitive areas are going to be rerouted or in some cases closed. There's going to be some connections that will be made so that it's a more continuous system and that it's clear. So the trails are going to be better kept, and they're going to be in better condition in general. I can't say, I don't know, Susan or Linda, if you want to jump in on this, but how we necessarily can
Sure.
anticipate, the numbers of visitors. Go ahead, Susan.
I think that, first of all, currently we are pretty excited because we have over 500 acres and they're spread out. And our visitors are different than some park visitors, like a swimming park where they spend the whole day. Our park visitors tend to come and spend about 2 to 3 hours here. We know that. We've kind of been monitoring that. So we do believe that makes a difference, but we are monitoring it. We monitor our numbers. We get monthly numbers, and we are constantly reviewing that and any changes that need to be made. So I do think we're aware of it, and currently we aren't concerned about that, but we are aware of that possibility, and we will be monitoring it. I think that's, I think, I don't see that in the near future, but it's possible, and we'll keep an eye on that. So.
And if I could just add, our trails coordinator came up and has done an assessment of the condition of the trails. And as Susan said, has made some plans for some reconstruction of certain trails. So that would be true on an ongoing basis, no matter how many people were there or how few people are there. So we try to pull the trails into good condition, and it may take a number of years as you start to work on them, and those tend to be done sometimes in-house, sometimes where you have to, if depending on the level of degradation, you have to hire outside. But it's Clermont's not seeing enough visitors that I would be concerned at the moment, even if even if you saw another 100,000 coming in per year. It's just not, this site is pretty large and has capacity to grow still. And not that I'm predicting 100,000 per year. I'm not. I'm just saying it has capacity.
All right, I see a comment. Are there environmentally fragile areas at the Clermont site? Yes, there are a few, and I would also encourage you, when you get a chance, to look at the full master plan, because they're described pretty well in there. There are state mapped wetlands there that have really unique ecosystems and provide really important habitat for the wildlife in the area. There are a lot of birds. It's a good birding site, and so we know that there's some fairly high quality habitat there for animals and native species. There are also a lot of water resources at the site that include vernal ponds, vernal pools that happen in the spring. We had our regional stewardship staff went out there and documented the vernal pools this last spring, and they took really beautiful pictures of all of the frogs' eggs and a lot of the life that those kinds of things support. And there was a section of the park that was identified by the Natural Heritage Program as a unique what do you call it, a community, a natural community that includes outcroppings and certain native plants. And so there are really important environmental and natural resources there. And I think that we've addressed their protection and improvement in our natural resources actions.
And just to add to that, the natural resource staff came out and did what they called a bio blitz to actually document sort of a baseline of what they found at a given time. And it's, you know, that was the first time that had been done at Clermont. Mark, you did the environmental analysis. Anything that stuck out in your mind?
No, Tana captured all that very well with the wetlands. One thing that I would say also is that the cultural resources and the archaeological resources are also what I would call a fragile environment too. There's so many archaeological resources in the ground there that we know about and we don't know about. That is something that is worthy of mentioning too.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's so much that that we can't touch on tonight, but there was a lot of work that has been done as part of this plan to document the known archaeological elements at the site. So a lot
Bill
of good stuff.
Krattinger is on. Maybe he could speak to that.
Oh yeah, okay.
That's more an Andy Ferry question, but yes, archaeology is a serious consideration at the site. You know, before you put a shovel in the ground, you have to have a good sense of what might be there based on sensitivity models and predictive modeling. And we have some, I'd say, a pretty good grasp on it, but I think there are still some unknowns out there.
And Madeline, do you just want to, one of our staff members was really involved with Andy Ferry in creating maps for the archaeological resources. Madeline, do you just want to say a couple things about that?
Yeah, so I mean, most of the site does have archaeological artifacts, either on the ground or underneath the ground. So there's lots of sensitive areas that we all need to consider whenever we're going to be implementing any changes anywhere in the site, honestly.
Madeline did a lot of work on that. All right, so I see another comment in the chat. In the house, are there unique interior features such as wallpaper, furniture, collections? Susan?
Yes. Yes, we are very fortunate to have an amazing collection of art, furniture that was documents, wallpaper, I mean, in small sections. As we even have plumbing, as Atana said, that were owned by the Livingstons, which is becoming more and more unique. I think that many houses are using reproductions or purchasing items that may be similar from outside collections. But we're very fortunate that, you know, Alice and John Henry went because, you know, of the era and that when they decorated the house in the, you know, the 20s and 30s, they were very excited and very family proud, so that they brought all of these collections together. So we are, that's part of this whole process of not only maintaining the structures, but also our collection is critically important to the future of the site and the history of the families. And what we've also found, which is just kind of an interesting addition, that we have collections at the house that are in the house on the tour floor and stored here, but we also have collections that are at Peebles Island, the Resource Center in Waterford, New York, which is a wonderful resource for all of the historic sites in New York State, all of the New York State owned historic sites. And we have found in doing our new exhibit that some of the items that we had overlooked in the past, we are re-examining with new eyes as we talk about the enslaved people that lived at Clermont and looking at these objects in it with a new interest. And I think we're finding out a lot more that we may have, you know, not been the focus of our study and interpretation at the time. So I think our collection continues to provide a wealth of knowledge and information to us, even though many of these objects have been, you know, with the state of New York for 50 years.
All right, thank you, Susan. So I'm going to move on. I don't see any new questions in the chat. I'm going to move on to the comments that we received in the registration form. We received a number of comments that expressed support and kudos for the plan and the process. So thank you for those of you who contributed those. So some of the other comments were, could you discuss any proposed changes to the narrative for historical interpretation? I think we have kind of touched on that. Susan, do you want to elaborate on anything?
Yes, I'm happy to talk about, we're very excited. We've been part of the Our Whole History initiative, which is part of the agency's initiative to really explore the stories of all the people that lived and worked at the sites, the New York State historic sites. Our new exhibit is a reflection of the work that we have done. If you haven't been to see our new exhibit in the visitor center, please come and enjoy it and really look at how we've used the research. There's been new research in the past 30 years. Our old exhibit, our old visitor center exhibit, was over 30 years old. So there's a lot of research that has been accumulated in the last 30 years about the lives of people that lived and worked here. For example, 30 years ago, the common expression about enslaved people was there was no information out there. Well, that's not what we found in the last 30 years. Is it's not true. There are lots of sources where we can find out more information, and have learned the names of 21 enslaved people that lived at Clermont, just at the Clermont version, not including the larger estate version of Clermont. So I mean, I think we are now opening a new tour, which will reflect this, our whole history and the diversity at Clermont, which will be opening, hopefully. We are hiring new people, and we've been waiting for some reinstallation of the house because we had the major restoration project that finished in the fall. We hope to be open by the beginning of June with a new tour that reflects this and, talks about all of the different stories. And I think we are using, as I said, for instance, we are quartz. We had quartz that were found when the house was burned. There were pieces of quartz that were found. And what we've learned about the quartz in the most recent research is that the quartz were used in African American or African cosmology, where they used to put the quartz as to ward off evil in putting them around door sills and above doors in houses. And we found them in a lot of other historic sites and in national parks. I've talked with some national parks people as well. So this is information that we had this at but we just didn't see it. We weren't looking in the way, or we didn't have the background information. So I think it's a very exciting time at Clermont. I think it will, people that may not have found our history relatable are now finding things that they can relate to, that they may not, the lives of the rich and famous may have been of interest to them, but it may not have been, and they could not see themselves. So I think people are now seeing themselves in the story that we are telling, and I think it's a much richer and exciting time to be at Clermont.
All right, thank you, Susan. Another comment that I see here is acknowledging, they would like to discuss acknowledging and educating about our impact on Indigenous peoples of the region, the land back movement, and they provided some suggestions for some speakers who could discuss this topic.
I'll take that. So we are working with the nations, and we are developing long-term relationships with them and embedding the stories of the Indigenous population into the Our Whole History narrative, so that you'll see that. We are, in working with the Indigenous populations, the whole acknowledgement issue is a little bit fraught. And so the determination has been not to utilize that form as much as engagement, because it's the engagement in the programming and the and working with the people of the Indigenous of the nations. And in particular, we have a very close relationship right now with the Stockbridge Munsee who were in this area, and I've been working to embed their story in our interpretation. And so that we think that would be more meaningful in the long run.
If I can just add, Linda, that it's evident in our new exhibit. We've been working with, we had an advisory committee that we're still working with, and Heather Rugel
Thanks, I
from
forgot about that.
the Stockbridge Muncie community was on our advisory committee. And so that all of the interpretive pieces that we did were reviewed by the Stockbridge Muncie community and had their input. And it, like I said, it ended up with a much richer product and a much truer story at the end of it. So I think that that is in the new exhibit and will continue to be in all that we do. Because what I want to say, and I think we were talking about this at a meeting earlier today, that this is an ongoing process. That history is not stagnant. That what we have up today in the visitor center and our tours, we're learning new things, and new research is being done daily, and we will add to the story, which can only enrich the lives of all our visitors and those that, you know, that are doing the work here. I think it makes for a much more exciting and dynamic story.
All right, that's great. One person asked, how will Clermont collaborate with nearby Hudson River states on programming and the tour script?
So I can start, and then Susan can wrap. So I referenced in my introductory remarks something called, you know, the Great Estates area, and there's a consortium that periodically, and not often enough, of all of the historic sites getting together, and over the years have tried to share what that programming might be, make sure that each of the guides from all the facilities are familiar with what's going on in each other, so they can be ambassadors to one another. And sorry, excuse me, I was going to sneeze, and it did. And then it, you know, that waxes and wanes in terms of how effective it's been. But we've been working with Duchess Tourism on over the years on a Great Estates Pass that we've been part of, that allows you to get a particular group rate, you know, rate at each of the facilities if you buy the pass. And I think that there's opportunity to continue collaboration and to weave different parts of the story of the Hudson Valley throughout all the sites, you know, going from Olana to Thomas Cole to, you know, over to Wilderstein or to Statsburg, and to into Hyde Park or Locust Grove and Clermont. They're all, you know, or Lucas Van Allen. There are all so many places, and we can try to figure out a way that helps people understand how they relate to one another and why they want to kind of go from one to the other, to the other, to the other. So I think there's an opportunity to create something that doesn't exist and build on what we've done in the past.
Yeah, just to add to that, Linda, we have actually been meeting this spring with Duchess Tourism. We're very fortunate to have 33 acres in Dutchess County. We straddle 2 counties. So we're always part of Duchess Tourism, and they've been a wonderful partner with us as well in planning activities that will, garden activities, for instance, where we'll be doing at a number of, all of the sites will be doing it on the same weekend, and they'll be promoted. So they're wonderful in promoting our events across the board. It also gives us an opportunity to talk about collaboration as a group. We did a virtual call with all of these site directors, and just, you know, with private and National Park Service and the state sites, it's very interesting to compare and, you know, talk about all your different programming, and we bounce ideas off each other. And I think we have in the past collaborated, you know, individual sites with each other, and we will continue to do so. And we really enjoy doing that. Even though our stories, you know, some stories are very different, but I think we find ways to work together, and we will continue to do that.
Okay, and it looks like there's a somewhat of a follow-up to that. It says, as there are many great houses, has each carved out an epoch to concentrate on?
Well, each house typically has, within New York State, we have an era that is your interpretive period. So that with the National Historic Sites and with the State Historic Sites, and typically with private sites as well, they have carved out as part of their original, you know, when they purchase the site and then we begin developing their mission, they carved out a time period. At Clermont, ours was an interesting decision by New York State because it was carved out in the 30s so that we could look back at all of the Rev War history and all of the years that the 7 generations of Livingstons that were here. If they did a Revolutionary War story only, we would be stuck in that era and wouldn't be able to talk about the more, the years, you know, the later years, all the way up to, you know, the Livingstons lived in the house until 45 and were on the grounds until the 60s. So I think it, you know, it's a decision that's made early on. And so I think that's typically what's done at historic sites and what's done in New York State Historic Sites.
All right, thank you. Another comment that came in with the registration, trail access outside of park hours.
I'm not
We
quite
don't
sure.
encourage it.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what that means, honestly. If it means that we let people on the trails when the park's closed, that, I mean, we don't encourage that as long as. Is there another meaning that I'm not seeing in that question?
Yeah, no, it's not really clear. I don't know if they're talking about a security issue or if they would like to have access outside of hours. But let's move along unless there's someone on the line who did add that comment. Let's see, the condition of Sylvan Cottage. So we do have in the master plan, you know, we're really only touching on really small fraction of the proposed actions in the plan here. Sylvan Cottage was a big topic of discussion. You know, the agency recognizes that it's in bad shape and that it's deteriorating, but also sees that it has a lot of potential. So there are actions in the plan that relate to different possibilities for its reuse. And what we ultimately landed on was, as I had noted earlier, that to retrofit it as an accessible multi-use education center. We also looked at the possibility of creating just stabilizing it and doing real basic repairs. And then another action would be to turn it into staff housing. So those were some of the possibilities, and this was actually the action that was preferred. This would include, of course, stabilizing and you know, renovating it so that it would be in very good shape and useful and functional on the site.
As an aside, we started it internally with staff. We just couldn't, it was too large a project and really will have to be done by an outside contract, which makes it very expensive. So that's one of the issues, is it just, you know, it all depends on whether there's enough capital funding to do some of those projects. And how high it is in a priority versus new parking area and new restrooms down in, you know, near the picnicking areas. So they're all in the plan so that as we are able to get funding or attract funders, either one, you know, whether it's public funding or private funding, then you have something that's already determined to be a need.
All right. And those are the only comments that we have at the moment. Any other comments? Feel free to jump in now.
Thanks, Matt, for your note. We just saw that.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank everybody for joining with us this evening. It's really helpful. I know we're a small but mighty group to this evening, very well-informed influencers within the county, and it's we appreciate your being here. There's an opportunity tomorrow to join again during, you know, for others that you might, if you talk to during the afternoon, we'll be doing this all over. And as Tana said, it will be available. The recording will be available for anybody to see. It's most important just to go to the plan and just leaf through it, you know, get a sense. And I think we're hoping that by having seen these sort of key action items that were described this evening, that when you get to the plan, it's more understandable and you can look at the process and have an easier time with understanding a master plan if it's not something you're used to seeing. So with that, we really are finished unless there's any other questions or statements from anybody else of my esteemed colleagues.
Yeah, and I also just want to repeat that the comment period goes through June 8th, and you can see the information up on the screen. You can send an email to that Clermont.plan address, or you can write actually a letter or a note in the regular mail. And we hope to, you know, as things come up over the next few weeks and you think of them, that you'll send those along. We welcome all input. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And
Thank you
yep.
so much.
Yeah, and with that, I'll close the meeting.
Thanks, Tana. Thanks
Yes.
for managing